The era of peak TV showed no sign of slowing down in 2019. Netflix alone put out so much original content this year that keeping up with everything has become a full-time job. In these trying TV times, it's up to critics to separate the wheat from the chaff and let everyone else know what shows are worth their valuable binge time. Not every series can be as good as The Crown or Russian Doll. Here are the 11 worst reviewed Netflix series of 2019 according to review aggregator Metacritic. 13 Reasons Why is both among the most popular and controversial shows on Netflix, given its exploration of uncomfortable subject matter like sexual assault and teen suicide. Unfortunately, the series really seems to have worn out its welcome in 2019. Season 3 is not just the year's lowest rated Netflix show on Metacritic, but the lowest rated show of 2019 in general. The Daily Beast's Kevin Fallon calls Season 3 misguided, narratively preposterous, and arguably offensive, while TV Guide's Megan Vick writes, just as the kids at the center of this show need to be held accountable for their actions, 13 Reasons Why needs to be held accountable for the messages it's sending. It's not good enough to have a few hits, the whole package has to make sense. Otherwise, why are we here and why are we watching? You'd think Netflix would want to promote a new sci-fi series starring Battlestar Galactica's Katie Sackhoff, but given the frosty reception to Another Life's first season and its story of two teams trying to make contact with extraterrestrial life, maybe it's just as well this one came and went with barely a peep. IGN's Matt Fowler writes, occasionally Another Life will land a decent surprise or provide an emotional moment that resonates, but its main superpower seems to be making the perils of space travel incredibly boring. Similarly, Collider's Lauren Tommen says the series struggles to establish its own identity in a season filled with underdeveloped characters and stakes that somehow manage to simultaneously feel both too high and not quite high enough. Netflix targeted YA horror fans with this unusual series about a teen girl who's given a life-saving heart transplant and becomes drawn into the strange world of her donor's family. IGN's Rosie Knight had a relatively positive take on Season 1, writing, even if the finished product might be lacking, it feels good that experimental, unconventional genre shows like this are being made. However, other critics were less taken with the series, with Variety's Daniel Daddario calling it a grody, nasty piece of work, and Collider's Haley Fouch accusing Season 1 of stretching the material impossibly thin. This new comedy series may have serious star power in the form of Idris Elba, but even Stringer Bell himself could do little to make Turn Up Charlie stand out from the crowd. IGN's Matt Fowler notes the series already had the misfortune of premiering right after Netflix canceled the critically acclaimed One Day at a Time, but that its real problem is being flat, rudimentary, and familiar. Meanwhile, TV Line's Dave Nemitz writes, it's a hard show to hate, but without Elba to anchor it, it'd be so lightweight, it would disintegrate in the air like a dandelion. Daybreak delivers a fairly novel take on the zombie genre, combining traditional gore and action with a John Hughes-esque teen comedy element. That combination impressed IGN's Matt Fowler, who writes, Daybreak weakens when it flails too far over the top, but when it finds the sweet balance between cartoon and catharsis, it can be surprisingly powerful. Unfortunately, many critics had a far lower opinion of Season 1. RogerEbert.com's Brian Tallarico criticizes Daybreak for being too cynical and self-aware by half, uninterested in actual characters, and the kind of meta-writing that calls attention to itself way too often. CNN's Brian Lowry is more blunt, calling the series a pretty tepid addition to an already saturated genre. This particular true crime documentary hasn't replicated the critical success of Netflix's Making a Murderer. While this Ted Bundy-centric series boasts previously unheard audio interviews with Bundy himself, few critics felt it added much to the story of one of America's most infamous serial killers. IGN's Jesse Shadeen writes, the show focuses too much energy on providing a linear, straightforward account of Bundy's life, without saying enough about what made Bundy tick and why the public became so fascinated by his crimes. This dark comedy produced, directed, and starring Ricky Gervais may rank among the lower-rated Netflix shows of 2019, but it seems to be more of a case of critics having polarizing reactions. IGN's Matt Fowler says the series is textbook Gervais. Its blueprint is very basic, and the story is as sleepy as the quaint English town it's set in, but there's a fundamentally lovely message about kindness underneath. Entertainment Weekly's Kristen Baldwin was especially pleased with Afterlife, calling it unexpectedly moving and a welcome throwback to the oddball sweetness of his most famous work, The Office. On the far other end of the spectrum, the AV Club's Josh Modell says it wants so badly to be both comedy and drama, to be both funny and touching, that it fails pretty spectacularly at both. This neo-noir anthology series was lauded for a strong cast that includes Renee Zellweger and Jane Levy, even as it was also criticized for its predictable and trope-filled approach to the genre. The Hollywood Reporter's Tim Goodman said this series basically rips off Indecent Proposal and then admits to doing so, as if that's a clever thing. While IGN's Alicia Lutz was generally more positive. Her review notes, "The frustration of What If lies in its ability to thread the noir thriller needle in an engaging enough way. It isn't campy enough to be fun or as smart as it thinks it is to be interesting. It just sort of lands with a flimsy thwap." The Punisher ended its too-short run on Netflix this year. That untimely end may be why the second season struggled to connect with critics as well as the final seasons of Daredevil and Jessica Jones. IGN's Jesse Shadeen says Season 2 improves on the first in some key ways, but also points out its narrative is more unfocused and its new characters struggle to measure up to the old guard. RogerEbert.com's Allison Shoemaker compares Season 2 to Frank Castle himself, calling it repetitive, bleak, and unwilling to admit that it might be capable of doing anything new. Many critics had high hopes for this thriller that explores the lingering aftermath of the Rwandan genocide as a general is put on trial for recruiting child soldiers. Sadly, despite the strong premise and timely subject matter, the series met with a mixed response upon release. Hollywood Reporter's Tim Goodman describes Black Earth Rising as a challenging but rewarding experience and praises creator Hugo Blick, saying, "Blick has few equals when it comes to taking on extraordinarily complex topics, and even fewer who can match his overall excellence in the finished product." Conversely, Variety's Daniel Daddario says the series squanders the audience's goodwill with ill-conceived narrative turns, a reliance on cliché, and worst, dialogue that defies belief. This recent addition to the Netflix library is an anthology series hosted by country music legend Dolly Parton. Every episode is inspired by a different iconic Parton tune. You'd think that premise would be an instant crowd pleaser, but even many devoted fans seem to find this series a hard pill to swallow. For instance, The Guardian's Lucy Mangan writes that Heartstrings lacks a scintilla of the wit, energy, humor, camp, glory, or fizz of Parton. Each one is a squeeze of pure schmaltz from an industrial tube of the stuff. While somewhat more positive on the series, The Hollywood Reporter's Robin Barr laments, Heartstrings is a great conceit tangled up in a cheap execution. By stretching Parton's songs beyond their breaking point and stuffing the minutes with tangential fluff, the producers end up softening the impact of her heartbreaking stories. Do you agree that this crop of shows deserves to live in Metacritic infamy? Let us know your picks for the worst Netflix shows of 2019, and then check out the best reviewed Netflix shows of 2019 and the biggest box office flops of the year. And for all your end of 2019 needs, keep it locked on IGN.